And we are back. Welcome to City Hall. This is the first in-person City Hall meeting that we've had since the beginning of the pandemic. Over the course of tonight's meeting, you're going to see a lot of different technology that has been brought into allowing all this to happen. In our council chambers, currently we have our councillors. We do have a couple of councillors who are doing it virtually, and that's why we're calling this a hybrid model. So councillors are able to go on Zoom. We have Councillor Miller and Councillor Harris who are on Zoom. And then we have the remaining councillors, Councillor Sorrento, Councillor Kushner, Councillor Porter, Councillor Garcia, Councillor Dodge, Councillor Cisco, Councillor Williamson, Councillor Townsend, Councillor Lilton, and Deputy Mayor Phillips, all in the room here for the first time since the pandemic. It's great to see everybody. And also joining us, we have our City Clerk, Bonnie Nitzko-Dunk, and our CAO, David Oakes. And then what we'll be having is staff will come on when staff are doing presentations. They will be joining us by Zoom and taking us through the presentation. So it's really an interactive here. And we do have a company that's helping us, WeStream, is helping us with the streaming of this council meeting moving forward. They are a technology company based here in Niagara. They do a lot of the streaming for different councils and organizations, so it will be a very seamless affair. So we welcome you who are joining us to the first in-person online hybrid city council meeting at the City of St. Catharines. And I would like to thank in particular Evan McGinty, who is here, and he's our IT expert guru on all things council. Maureen is also with him. Maureen is overseeing, helping Evan, and I believe Kristen Sullivan, is she the deputy clerk? So when you're not here, she sits in your seat. Yes. Right, and she's just outside in the hall right now. She doesn't want to get all the accolades, but she has been really working behind the scenes, trying to make sure that this is able to take place. And we do it in a way that is ensuring we're following all the rules and regulations of the Municipal Act. Council did approve the bylaw that does allow us to have electronic meetings and hybrid meetings. And for viewers watching online, we have City Council here in Council Chambers. Delegations will be speaking through Zoom, and we don't have any delegations tonight. And you'll be able to watch through live stream. You can watch it back in at your leisure. And I would like to thank Councillor Cisco, who was chairing the last meeting of council in August. And I was traveling at the time, so I was unable to be here, but I heard it was a great meeting. A little shorter than usual, so that speaks to my inability to keep conversations tight. So good on that one. So we're going to start with O Canada, and I'll turn it over to the council coordinator, and we're able to stand for the first time in council chambers. And then we will do a moment of silence as Councillor Sorrento had passed that motion.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. Car ton bras s'est porté le paix, il s'est porté la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
All right, thank you very much, Council. We now have the land acknowledgement by Deputy Mayor Bill Phillips, who will be doing the land acknowledgement tonight.
Thank you, Chair. We acknowledge that the land on which Council meets today This is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Acknowledging this is a reminder that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips. And before we get into the mayor's report, I just want to touch on, since we did the land acknowledgement, September 30th is Truth and Reconciliation, and as we approach this day, it's the first annual Truth and Reconciliation Day here in Canada, and the city is continuing to build our relationship with the First Nations and supports for the calls of action through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And through our MOU partnership with the Niagara Region Native Centre and working with Indigenous community partners, we are seeking more ways to respectfully mark the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, not just on this day, but all year round. It is a commitment that is reflected in the land acknowledgement we share when meeting as council or community events. And so I just want to introduce our speaker to speak on this. It's the manager, our new manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Shannon McHugh, and she'll be just giving us a bit more detail now. So Shannon, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's very nice to see all of you in council chambers. What a nice change. Thank you for having me today. So as Mr. Mayor mentioned, my name is Shannon McHugh. It's the first time I'm seeing many of you today. So I look forward to working and engaging with you in the future. You should have sort of before you a memo that Dave would have distributed a bit earlier today that sought to give you a little bit of insight into sort of the high level planning to date for September 30th. So as Mayor Sendzik did indicate, this is, the first annual declared holiday for National Truth and Reconciliation Day. Some of you might recognize it as it's traditionally been celebrated or commemorated as Orange Shirt Day. So we've been really trying to find sort of meaningful ways to provide our staff and to provide the public with information and the opportunity to sort of reflect and be educated on sort of this colonial history that, we can't hide, that we need to gain a better understanding of in our efforts towards reconciliation with our Indigenous communities. So as the mayor has sort of helpfully introduced for me, we're really looking to make this be an Indigenous-led approach. There'll be upcoming meetings with the Niagara Regional Native Centre, and that's sort of the crux of why we can't give, an example or a strict schedule for September 30th in terms of what we're planning. We're really wanting this to be an Indigenous-led and an Indigenous-formed approach. So we'll be having that meeting, and I think some additional details will sort of flow from that. The point here, though, is we wanted to make sure that staff have the opportunity, as Mayor Sendzik said, not just to sort of honor and commemorate the day on the day of. We want to further commit sort of the corporation to training and further understanding on a year-round basis. So we're exploring ways that we can perhaps collaborate and look to do that. We're in discussions with the museum, the library. We've been in touch with the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. We've been in touch with Remember Me, a National Day of Remembrance, which is sort of a Indigenous-led live event at Parliament Hill on September 30th. So all of that to say, a lot of sort of discussion ongoing, a lot of collaboration ongoing, but we're really focusing on that crux of that call to action, right? Making sure that we're honoring survivors, families, communities, and making sure that public commemoration piece isn't lost. So by staying open and operational, we'll be able to sort of live up to that piece of the call to action specifically. So that's a little bit of a high level sort of update for you all. And as I say, as the day gets closer, more details will certainly be released in terms of specifics and how we intend to do that.
All right, thank you very much, Shannon, and welcome to your new position as Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the City of St. Catharines. And just a follow-up on that, and just want to remind everyone that we all have responsibilities under the Truth and Reconciliation, and there's excellent resources that we have here in the City of St. Catharines from the St. Catharines Museum, who's doing an outstanding job on collecting and providing information on Indigenous culture here in our community. The Niagara Region Native Center or Fort Erie Native Friendship Center websites, both are good resources. The National Center for Truth and Reconciliation website is very informative. The Every Child Matters page at the Woodland Cultural Center here in our community. And on September 30th, wear an orange shirt in remembrance of thousands of Indigenous children who were sent away to residence schools, and many of whom did not come back. And so I also want to say congratulations and a big thank you to Tim Johnson and Michelle Elise Burnett from Celebration of Nations this past weekend. For those who got to participate, it was an amazing weekend. Again, the 5th annual celebration of Indigenous culture here in our community, but celebrating the culture across the country. And it is arguably one of the best cultural festivals celebrating the Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit cultures, music, food, everything to do with the Indigenous communities. And the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre is the home to that. It was in person and virtual. Got to participate in some of the in-person events, and it was very well attended. And I just want to say congratulations to some awards that were handed out so the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre and Celebration of Nations. They hand out these awards to recognize those who are making contributions in our community for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And Performing Arts is Julie Lumsden, Visual Arts Leona Sky Gramond, in Intellectual Advancement Rick Hill, Empathetic Traditions Jennifer Dockstader, and she's from the Fort Erie Native Center. Language and Culture, so it's Tayana Tay Frank Miller, and the Two Row Alliance, Gervin Fearon, who is a just recent past president of Brock University and now president of George Brown College. And I just want to say thank you to the First Ontario Performing Arts team, Colleen, Sarah, Annie, Jordy, and the entire crew who really went above and beyond. And also a special thank you to Fred Bowering and Brian Kahn, who were the firekeepers all weekend. So from the first fire on Friday morning and through all the events, it was great to see so many people come together and be a part of this. I also want to say congratulations to Sean Vanderklis, who has been announced as the new host of CBC Radio Morning in Thunder Bay. What an achievement for Sean. Sean has been an amazing ambassador in our community, and we'll miss his voice on local radio, one dish, one mic. But this is a great career opportunity for Sean, and as he moves into the Thunder Bay market, we know he's going to be a great success. He's a bright young person from our community, and it's going to be great to hear him on the CBC radio. Just a brief COVID update. Just want everybody to know the provincial vaccine certificate comes into effect next week on September 22nd. And so double dose vaccines will be required for indoor dining, gyms, sports, entertainment, and much more. You'll get more information as it becomes available by the province. And again, if you have questions about or concerns about vaccines, please talk to your trusted health professionals, your doctor, nurse practitioner, public health. Don't just Google it. A lot of misinformation on Google. And also want to talk about the Wine Festival, and I know our Deputy Mayor is part of the Niagara Grape Wine Festival Board. Heading into its 70th year, it's a little different this year. There's not going to be any of the large parade through the downtown, nor at Montebello Park, the 2 weekends of grape and wine festivities. But the festival's hosting a Discovery Pass with food and wine pairings, and the Best of Montebello Park outdoor concerts will continue at the backyard of the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre with some of the most favorite local bands. So tickets and capacity are limited, so check out the website for more information. And it's great to see that the Grape and Wine Festival is adapting to what we're experiencing here in St. Catharines, Niagara, and I'm confident it's going to be back bigger and better. But this year, they're doing things in a different way, and I just want to give a thanks to our Deputy Mayor Phillips, who just wants to say a few words on this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to tell the people at home, I got an email today from Dorian Anderson, and the tickets for Jonesy on the Saturday night, the band, I think they were at 95% sold. The Caverners are playing on the Friday night. There's still tickets available there. As far as the passport program is concerned, it is exceeding our expectations as we speak. The deal is that I think it's $49. You get to go to 6 different wineries of choice. There's 20 wineries that have been signed. So you get 6 different wineries for the $49, and with that you get a glass of wine and something to eat paired with the wine that's available. So for those who are interested, I suggest you act as soon as possible because these things could be sold out pretty quick. There's also going to be a concert on the Saturday afternoon, and there's tickets for sale at the same location too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips, for your leadership there at the festival. And we also have an upcoming federal election on Monday, September 20th. Today was the last day for advanced polls, so make sure you get out on the 20th to exercise your right to vote. If you have any questions, visit electionscanada.ca. There's a lot of issues on the agenda, and just be informed when you go to vote. The Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce is hosting a St. Catharines candidates debate, which you can watch online, free tomorrow on Tuesday, so you could watch that on Tuesday. And following up on the election, I just want to briefly comment about the incident of vandalism that took place in St. Catharines on a St. Catharines resident who is the St. Catharines MP currently and also part of the federal election currently. And it's unfortunate to see these kind of incidents happening. It's disheartening to see this in our community. There's been an increase of harassment when campaigners are visiting doors. When other candidates are going door to door, they're getting met with racial slurs. And this is here in our community. So when people say that racism doesn't exist in St. Catharines, just listen to what some of the candidates are experiencing. And kind of hate that you're seeing with that vandalism that was taking place and those kind of behaviors is not something that I think any of us would ever condone. And it is a poison to democracy. When people talk about democracy, they don't talk about that kind of democracy. They don't talk about the freedom to be able to express your hatred towards someone or to be able to vandalize some of their property. That's not democracy. So I think just people need to just understand that when it comes to politics, there's healthy debate, which I think we all appreciate, but that divisiveness that's come into this has to stop. It's not healthy for anybody. And so I know all of council supports this feeling because we're all elected folks. We go door to door and we see the feedback that comes in on social media. This is not a new phenomenon, and the online comments that have been surfacing over the past little while is just an example of what I guess what people feel that they can freely do on social media without any kind of retribution. But the matter of the fact is that we're all human beings and we should be treated with the same amount of respect that we would expect. So the person who did the spray painting, would they want someone to show up at their house because they don't agree with their position and spray paint their front door? Of course not. It was a cowardly act, and I hope they catch the person. But I think the people who are pushing these kind of acts or who are encouraging these kind of activities, they need to stop and they need to check themselves as well. So it's frustrating because all the candidates that are running in our community, I believe, are good people just trying to get their position out there. No one needs to be subjected to that kind of behavior. So I'll end with that, which is an unfortunate note, but I gotta say, to see council here today, you've made my day. It's been a long time since we all got to see each other in the same room. So I hope we have a good meeting here tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to the clerk for the adoption of the agenda.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The following items have been placed in Council's Sugar Sink folder. Memorandum from the CAO regarding National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And you have amendments to this evening's agenda. The staff recommendation for the Council Correspondence Report is being amended to remove the clause that Council appoint the individual outlined in the confidential memorandum from the Deputy City Clerk to the Fallen Fighters Memorial Task Force, as the memorandum is no longer coming forward for this evening's meetings. And those are all my changes for this evening.
Thank you. Is there any changes to the agenda you'd like to see, Councillor Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you would permit me, when it's time, I just want to take 1 minute to thank staff with relation to 6.1 on the consent agenda.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Williamson?
There we go. Thank you. I know I didn't ask to have it pulled, and I don't want it pulled, but the 6.2 on the progress on climate change, if we could just circulate to the Green Advisory Committee and other environmental groups, please.
Great point. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Littleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just when we get to 6.3.4 about the neighborhood associations, I'm looking to get an update from staff at where that's at.
All right, thank you for that. Any conflicts tonight? Councillor Miller?
Yeah, I have a conflict and it's loading. I think it's 6.3.
9.3, I think.
9.3. That's why you're the mayor. I have a conflict on my 9.3 due to my employer. Thank you.
I'm looking at the council coordinator because he's the one who told me that, so. All right, thank you, Councillor Miller. Okay, seeing no other conflicts, I need a mover and a seconder for the agenda. Councillor Cisco, seconded by Councillor Porter. All in favor? We'll do a show of hands. I got 2 show of hands on Zoom. Okay, it's carried unanimously. Adoption of the minutes. Councillor Phillips is moving the minutes for Monday, August 30th, 2021. Councillor Dodge will second it. Any comments for the minutes? Okay, all in favor of the minutes as presented? Okay, that's carried. And we move now to consent reports. So we'll start with Councillor Porter, 6.1. You just have a few comments, and then we'll go to Councillor Littleton.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. For the folks at home, the report relates to the 3 community ice rinks that staff worked with the community organizations to put together a couple years ago. It was actually, I think it was my very first motion on council, and I didn't know what I was doing. So it's actually quite thrilling for me to see this report come back. And I'm in a neighborhood association, and it was a neighborhood association that had one of the ice rinks, and it was in fact their idea that I brought forward, and it spread to Port Dalhousie and to Old Glenridge. And just reading the report, there were 3 ice rinks, 40 skaters a day, 28 skatable days this year, and loads of volunteers from the community, donations, community collected donations for community care. And this year it happened in the middle of lockdown during the pandemic, so we didn't realize how important this was going to be to each community. Staff really worked hard on this and worked well with the community, and you can see the good relationships between the community and city staff being formed and fostered through these smaller projects. And it's really nice to see during these times, which are a lot of people are not in the best frame of mind right now, but it's good to see the community come together. So I just wanted to thank Director Christie and the staff and all of the neighborhood associations and the volunteers to make this happen for kids and families, and it really helped break down people's isolation this winter, and it was incredibly important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. And for 6.2, Councillor Williamson asked this to be circulated. Can we also, there are external groups, like I think the Climate Action Now, St. Catharines, and some of those other groups, if they're able to circulate these reports, because I think it does help inform them what we're doing instead of after the fact, so that would be greatly appreciated. And then Councillor Littleton, you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's interesting that Councillor Porter was talking about the Fitzgerald neighbors and their motion about the skating rink, because what I'm asking about is that before the pandemic, and in this our article that has been written by Brock University, we were going to have a community gathering with all of the community groups in Niagara, and we're going to look at how we can strengthen community neighborhood associations. And so what this report that has come forward to us in correspondence is just a study that was done talking about this in other communities. So my question is to staff, when do we think we might be able to get this engagement session, bringing together our community groups? Because one of the things they do talk about in this report is doing that in 2022. So I'm really anxious to hear about that. So if staff could just update us, thank you.
Director Christie.
Good evening, and thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, we will certainly work with the NCO at Brock to determine when this event can happen and whether or not we can do this virtually or in person. Certainly virtually would be far easier. We know that the anticipation for this event going into it from last year was heavy, and that we had lots of registrants, and we were actually at a point where we would have had to look for a larger room. So I think that the important thing is that we work with the NCO at Brock to figure out sort of how we deliver this, and from there we can identify a timeline with them. We have started the conversations with your office, Mr. Mayor, to see what kind of role and leadership role that the city will play in planning this event, and we are certainly looking forward to it.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Littleton. Okay. I'll look to the clerk we need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Kushner, you'd like to move the consent agenda, seconded by Councillor Townsend. And we'll call the question and have the clerk do the roll call. First roll call in person.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this evening's consent agenda for the public, 6.1, Community Recreation and Culture Services, Community Outdoor Ice Rink Pilot Project Update, 6.2, Engineering Facilities and Environmental Services Progress towards St. Catharines Climate Change Targets, and 6.3, Legal and Clerk Services, Office of the City Clerk, Council Correspondence. Councillor Kushner.
Yes.
Councillor Harris.
Yes.
Councillor Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Dodge.
Yes.
Councillor Littleton.
Yes.
Councillor Miller.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Porter.
Yes.
Councillor Cisco.
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento.
Yes.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
And Mayor Sendzik.
Yes.
Carried unanimously.
Okay, there's no public meetings, and we don't have any presentations, but we do have presentations from some staff members as we get into the DCs. So council chambers is in all municipalities in our country represent the seed of local democracy. The many acts that govern us understand the necessity of the collective voice when discussions are being made to grow our space, pass our bylaws, and seek opinions into very complex issues. We recognize the right of the majority to decide, the minority to be heard, and the public to have an opportunity to participate, and all participants to be treated with courtesy and respect. It is imperative that elected officials, citizens, and staff have input, and it is paramount that we listen to one another, question one another, but we understand we do this in a way that never undermines any person's abilities or the dignity in our council chambers. So with that, we're going to head off into Financial Management Services, 2021 Development Charges Background Study and Bylaw. If you do have questions of the consultants, they won't be presenting tonight, but they will be here to have, if there are any questions. And prior to discussing their report, council will receive a presentation from the Director of Planning and Building Services, Director Kitte, and Adam Smith, Manager of Accounting and Payroll, regarding 2021 Development Charge Background and Study Bylaw. And after their presentation, I will call on Councillor Littleton, who is the chair of the task force on bylaws on behalf of council, to say a few words about the process so that the public can be very much aware of the length that we've gone through to ensure that this is a process that has been as robust as possible. So turn it over to, I believe, Director Kitte will be first, and we'll have a presentation that comes up on the screen.
Thank you. Good evening, Council, development industry partners, the business community, and our residents. Tonight, we are pleased to present a recommendation to Council that the City reinstate development charges as part of our commitment towards better financial stability and more strategic decision-making for the future. Next slide, please. As many will recall from the October 2020 workshop, the Engage STC project page with survey and video, and the July 2021 public meeting, development charges are collected when a building permit is issued to recover growth-related costs such as roads, stormwater, water, wastewater infrastructure, fire services, library, recreation and transit services, and growth-related studies. Reinstating development charges represents a transformational shift from having the entirety of infrastructure responsibilities being borne by the taxpayer and correcting an unbalance whereby growth will now pay for their fair share of growth. The City of St. Catharines is the only municipality in Niagara region, as well as the Greater Golden Horseshoe area, where DCs at the local level are not currently being collected. While this has created an economic advantage to the development industry and assisted with the creation of development at a time of more modest growth, the projected growth now of the city in terms of people, housing units, and jobs are such that additional revenue sources must be leveraged in an effort to keep integral, publicly accessible services and amenities at the levels that our citizens expect in the future. The City of St. Catharines is the only Niagara community identified in the Place to Grow plan as an urban growth centre. Natural constraints such as the Niagara Escarpment and Lake Ontario, as well as Greenbelt Plan boundaries protecting tender fruit croplands, encourage the city to embrace growing up, not out, while particularly targeting the downtown urban core for intensified growth.
So in terms of consultation, staff has been engaging with external stakeholders through 2021. We've collected feedback from the public through an Engage STC survey, which supported the reinstatement of DCs in the city. The public meeting was held with feedback limited to requesting some additional transitional measures. And staff have met directly with the Niagara Home Builders Association, who are also one of the stakeholder representatives on the Development Studies Task Force, which met 3 times to review content in the development charges background study. So tonight's presentation isn't intended to cover all the information in the background study that was presented at the public meeting. We've already done that, but instead tonight to focus on changes that have occurred since the public meeting and to ensure that there's an understanding of the recommendations before council for your consideration tonight. So since the public meeting on July 12th, we've had a few small changes to the background study and bylaw. In our staff review, we identified one project that had been included in 2 listings. So it was removed from active transportation and resulted in a small decrease in rates. Also, based on the public meeting feedback and original staff intent, there was an additional transitional provision added to the bylaw, and Tammy will cover that in a little bit more depth later in the presentation. We've also just provided some updated rate comparisons here based on the updates from the addendum report to the background study. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but whether it's residential, commercial, or industrial, the revisions to our rates don't impact where we fall relative to our comparators, both within the region that are shown here or with our regular comparator group. And just for the industrial rates that are shown on this slide, keep in mind we have proposed an industrial development charge grant program, which would cover the city development charge and effectively make our rates equivalent to Niagara Falls, Fort Erie, and Port Colborne. There's a lot of recommendations in the report before you tonight. So to try and assist with the understanding of all of them, we've categorized them into study-related, bylaw, administrative, and exemption funding related recommendations. So first are the study recommendation. There's 7 of those. I'm not going to read through all of them, but in summary, they are required in order to support the basis for the calculations in the DC study and support the rates included in the development charges bylaw. I will point out that the final of these 7 recommendations here is that the capital project listing is adopted, subject to further annual review during the capital budget process. So just because a project has been included in the study doesn't mean it's approved at this point. It still has to be approved through the annual budget project or process, just like any other capital project would be. The next category of recommendations are the bylaw-related ones. So these 4 recommendations will enact the collection of city DCs under the DC bylaw and approve the 3 grant programs, which are referred to within the bylaw. Then we have 2 administrative recommendations. So these recommendations would see a staff member added to the city complement to administer the development charge program and the creation of new obligatory reserve fund for each of the new services and categories of services outlined in the background study. We don't currently have the staff capacity for the administration of DCs and reserves that are required in order to interpret bylaw, track collections and exemptions, manage grant programs, and the funding of capital projects. So there's some additional capacity required there. And last but not certainly not least, we have recommendations related to the funding of exemption and grant programs and foregone DC collections. These recommendations refer funding to the operating budget deliberations for 2022, but further explanation of what this funding is and how it will be used will be covered in the next few slides. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Tammy to talk about the transition provision in the bylaw.
Thank you. The proposed development charges bylaw before you this evening include transitional clauses predicated on fairness to developments that are already in the pipeline and active. When a developer acquires a piece of property, they compile what is referred to as a pro forma. It's essentially a financial accounting of their development, which sets out carrying costs like mortgages, insurance, taxes, and utilities, process-related costs such as their consultants, architects, engineers, surveyors, lawyers, their study, development application, and permit costs, and also includes their construction cost estimates based on quantity and cost of materials, their contingencies, etc. The pro forma also includes market-based information on anticipated sales, given the market of the day and projections. As it can take months, if not years, to get through development process, particularly if environmental remediation and heritage preservation are involved, the institution of development charges at the 11th hour, when they weren't originally contemplated as part of the pro forma, can be enough to be fatal to a project, particularly if the development has been pre-sold. As such, in response to this industry feedback from the public meeting, the recommendation before you this evening includes transition clauses so that developments with a site plan and/or a zoning bylaw amendment applied for on or after January 2017 have until December 31st of 2022 to complete their development processes in an effort to be exempted from paying development charges.
Okay. When it comes to funding of foregone development charge revenues or collections, you might be asking, why would there be a cost to something that we don't currently collect? And why would it be an operating budget impact? It really comes back to how the charges are calculated and collected. The growth forecast covers a period from 2021 to 2041. And in order to collect all of the charges included in the study, we would need to collect charges from every development that occurs over that period of time. So anytime we're unable to collect development charges, whether that's because of a mandatory exemption under the Act, a timing requirement under the Act or self-imposed, a grant program that the city is offering, we need to fund those from another source. So we need to have something else to fill in that development charge funding that's not available. Similarly, if we didn't implement development charges, another source, which would likely be tax levy and or debt, would be required to fund all of the growth-related costs, which is what we've had to a small extent with a little bit of growth happening over the past few years, but is expected to increase as we see more growth occurring. The other important thing to understand when it comes to funding exemptions and foregone revenues is that while they are initially an operating budget impact, they actually end up being a source of funding for the capital budget. So what this chart on the slide is supposed to be showing is that operating budget funds are transferred into the DC reserves to recognize the collections that we weren't able to collect. The DC reserves are then used to fund the growth-related cost of capital projects in the capital budget. So by transferring these funds into the development charge reserves, it helps to ensure that we actually have enough funding in the DC reserves to cover those costs in the capital budget. Just a really quick example of what happens when grants, exemptions, or foregone revenues are incurred by the city. You have a project, it doesn't pay any development charges. You transfer those directly into the obligatory reserves. We have a capital project come forward with a growth component, and then as that project is completed, we transfer the funds from the DC reserves to that project to use those DCs. We've also been asked what projects there might have been over the past few years that could have been funded from development charges if we had citywide DCs in place in the past. An example that we were able to find was the Kiwanis Aquatic Center. The facility roughly doubled in size when it moved from the West Park Pool and the Grantham Library branch. And after you take into consider the upper level of government grants and other non-city revenues, a project like this could have been eligible for roughly $7 million in development charge funding. So what this helps to show also is if we don't have DCs, where does that funding come from? Most likely it's going to come from debt. And I'll pass it back now to Tammy to wrap things up.
The City of St. Catharines is the leading growth center for Niagara region. The reintroduction of development charges at the local level is a significant step forward towards fiscal responsibility and financial sustainability. The recommendations before you this evening directly support Council's strategic goals of supporting affordable housing, employment creation, and intensification in the downtown. Furthermore, it represents a shift from placing all growth-related infrastructure burden on the taxpayer to a more balanced approach whereby growth pays its fair share of growth. Development charge collection and allocation will assist with capital budget forecasting and financing, strategic decision-making, and investment back into the community. And as such, we recommend approval of the DC bylaw before you this evening. Representatives from Watson and Associates are also present to assist with any questions you may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director Kitte and Manager Smith. And I'm going over now to the chair of the task force, Councillor Littleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to staff for the presentation tonight. It was my pleasure to act as chair of the Development Studies Task Force, and we met for several times, as you heard, over a span of a few months. The report before you is obviously very meaty. It was a lot of work, and I thank the task force members. We had numerous stakeholders from the Niagara Home Builders Association, the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce, the Niagara Industrial Association, the Niagara Construction Industry, Niagara Regional Housing, and a resident at large on our committee, as well as, and so the people that I want to thank is Vice Chair Chuck McShane, Alex Ganasini, Cameron Banach, Rob Hill, Kevin Jacoby, Hugo Cheshire, and Councillors Cisco, Porter, Garcia, and Dodge for all the work that they put in to the task force. We had some very good discussions, and also to staff for the many hours that they spent working on this. At our last meeting, the task force endorsed the staff recommendation, which is before you tonight. It took into consideration revisions which are included in the addendum report before you. I'm happy to move this motion, the staff motion, and as I do so, I just want to say one of the most important slides I think that we saw tonight is with that $20 million price tag for the Kiwanis Aquatic Center, that $7 million or 35% of it could have been funded from development charges. So I think this is a really great move if we move forward and pass this bylaw tonight, because that's an extraordinary amount that we would be able to recoup that's not on the back of current taxpayers, but is going to be for future growth. So I'm moving this motion. It's seconded by Councillor Harris. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Littleton. And in terms of the speakers, those who weren't on the task force, if there's any questions for those who weren't on the task force, I'll look to you first, since the task force members have been involved in this right from the very beginning, and I think they've done an outstanding job. It can be a complex issue to get sort of your heads around, so the fact that this has come the way it is today speaks volumes about the efforts that you put in. So who would like to speak on this? Councillor Kushner, you're leaning forward.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I recall, when the consultant made the recommendation, there are no transitional exemptions. Was that correct?
I don't know, but I'll go to the consultants to see what they have to say.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, when we undertook the study, we looked to calculate the full cost recovery charge. There were some of the mandatory exemptions that we included, and there were some more common exemptions that were part of our study. Past that, then there's additional things that either council or staff feel that's most appropriate for St. Catharines, and that's where there was further refinements that were made.
Okay, so there were some transitional exemptions, and it was based on the idea that the development community had a pro forma, and therefore these would be additional expenses. But was there any consideration given to the fact that housing prices were rising, and therefore the pro forma would have been affected two ways? One, because the transitional charge, but at the same time affected by the additional revenues from increasing home prices.
There was, through you, Mr. Mayor, there was some discussion on, obviously, the changing cost of housing, not only in the Niagara region, but really we're seeing it across Ontario. And it's kind of a, I guess, a bit of a double-edged sword. If with growth, you need to build infrastructure to accommodate that growth, if you reduce the charge, you don't have development charges, then what happens is it shifts the cost burden to the existing resident. So affordability is not only considered to the new purchaser of a home, but then you have your current residents and such. And if there's corresponding increases in their taxes as a result of not having the money, there's impacts on the affordability of existing homes as well. So it's, we did have some discussions, but where we are is what's contained within the staff report.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kushner. Any other questions of those who weren't on the task force? Councillor Sorrento.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just through you to, I'm drawing a blank, I'm sorry. I'm just gonna speak to it very quickly. I'm forgetting my question. So at first I wasn't going to vote in favor of this because I felt like it was gonna be passed on to home buyers. But the more I think about it, the more I read, spoke with the director and Chair Littleton, I think that voting in favor of this report is the right thing to do, because otherwise the future burden is going to be put on the homeowners and the residents. So I do support this. I was very happy to read that there was a transitional clause, and I just remembered my question through you to the director. I think I read in the report, Director Kite, that I believe staff have been advising applicants that there could be development charges throughout the last 2 years. Is that correct?
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, that is correct. When council originally agreed to fund the development studies, the three of them, from that point forward in our pre-submission consultation meetings with future and present applicants, they have been advised that a development charge background study was being undertaken. They were directed to the website to review and stay on top of the process, and they've been told that the anticipated start date would be January 1st of next year.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So then this would come as to no surprise to the applicants with whom we were dealing in the past couple of years. So they would be prepared for this. So one other final question through you, Mr. Mayor, to the director. I believe that this is going to be reviewed. Should it be the will of council to pass this bylaw, it will be reviewed every 5 years. That's correct?
Through the mayor to the councillor, yes, that's correct. The legislation requires that a municipality review its DC bylaw and background study every 5 years.
Okay, that's great. I'll definitely be supporting it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to staff, the task force, and all people involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Miller, you're up.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks to staff and everyone on the task force. Certainly in favor of development charges and happy to read most of this report. I did have just a couple, I suppose, clarification questions that maybe I just didn't understand. There's, I guess, sort of following on what Councillor Sorrento said, how will the success or lack thereof of development charges be measured every 5 years or whenever we're reviewing this?
Through the mayor to the councillor, I can start and perhaps others could add on to it. Under the legislation, our finance department is actually required to report back on an annual basis to council as to how much has been received in development charges and the state of the reserve fund, as well as the allocation to any of the projects that have been identified through the growth studies.
Okay. Okay. So, but I suppose I'm wondering if, are we looking at the amount of development that takes place in the city, let's say over the next 5 years after this is implemented, as some sort of success or lack thereof factor?
Through the mayor to the councillor, again, I think through the annual reporting, when it's demonstrated which capital projects are going to have allocations from development charges and how much it is, council will be able to see on those projects how much money is being funded through growth related development as opposed to taxpayer.
Okay, I guess my only fear about this is if we see external factors, which are of course out of our control, impact development or development rates, and by rates I mean amount, not fees, in St. Catharines, that this will somehow be used to suggest that development charges have had a negative impact. Is that on the zeal, I suppose, that developers have for developing in St. Catharines? Is that being considered?
Through the chair to the councillor, the city of St. Catharines is the only municipality at a local level that is not currently collecting development charges through the entire Greater Golden Horseshoe. When we did not have DCs for a period of 12 years, it was also during a time which growth was perhaps a little more stagnant, and it was used as part of our marketing for our area. As we can see now, growth is coming. It has already started, and we need to provide appropriate infrastructure and amenities for the residents we have now, as well as the residents of the future. And having development charges will help us fund that necessary infrastructure. Developers, quite honestly, are used to paying development charges throughout the GTHA, and they're used to paying more. To engage properly with them, we included, as you heard from Councillor Littleton, representatives from all facets of the construction and home building industry into the process itself, so that they would be fully part of the process and aware of the fees and mainly how they were calculated. So no, I don't believe that the institution of development charges would contribute to a halt in growth. We're seeing substantial immigration to the country, to the province, and significant migration through the GTHA due to affordability factors. So I think the growth we're starting to see will only push ahead.
Okay, and to be clear, I certainly have unlimited zeal for development charges. I think they're great. I'm just concerned. I just hope we're putting in some buffer so that there isn't a political argument made in the future that these have somehow hurt development when you know, we need to be considering obviously external factors that influence development as well. But you know, we can cross that bridge a couple councils from now, it sounds like. The only other clarification question I have is there was some mention about why in the section about why rates are lower. I think I understand for the most part, but there was a mention of the availability of up-to-date master plans lowering our rates. Can someone just, that's one of maybe I just didn't understand.
Maybe go to the consultant on that one.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, when we went through with staff and we were identifying the...
Jacob, can you check if any key down there or anything?
Nope. We got to turn off your mic there, whoever's out there.
I believe that's Councillor Harris doing some parenting. And we can all learn something from that.
I hope I wasn't being parented at that particular moment, but that's fine. No, we had gone through to identify with staff infrastructure to support the growth, and there are areas of intensification within the city where it's unclear whether the impacts of that intensification, what the impacts might be on the infrastructure. They may be undersized water mains, undersized sewers. We need to consider more about the movement of people and goods. We have included within the DC several master plan studies. And so at this particular point, we've identified very obvious infrastructure needs, but there may be more that will be identified through the master plan process. So the starting point is to provide for the studies, and then we'll see what arises from the studies.
So the shorter answer to that is when you have the master plans in place, you actually have a more detailed costing of what's to be expected moving forward. So we can actually get to a better estimate than if we didn't have any master plans. That's probably a 30-second way of just saying that.
Well put. Thank you.
Layman's terms, which I always appreciate. I'm certainly going to be happy to support this. I ring what Councillor Littleton said about appreciating that example being included, but it was obviously incredibly infuriating as well. So I'm happy we will not be missing out on those millions of dollars in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. And I don't see any further questions. Okay, from the committee members, other than Councillor Garcia, is there any other committee members? Councillor Cisco, and then I'll Councillor Garcia, you can go last because you probably have a couple of questions. Councillor Cisco.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And actually, just a comment. I know that the decision to remove development charges, a number of years ago, was a difficult decision. But I also know, and I think most of us recognize, political ideologies aside, that at the time it was likely the right decision for the benefit of the community. I think and having sat on this committee, I've been able to watch firsthand as this process has gone through and how thorough it is with the consultants, with the development industry stakeholders, with residents. I think now is definitely the right time to reinstitute those development charges. We've butted up against the infrastructure issues that we have and the infrastructure deficit that we have over the last number of years, and I think we've all got a much better idea of the true costing of that infrastructure deficit now. And development charges are one of the few methods that the municipality has when growth occurs to be able to actually pay for that infrastructure in a way which doesn't disadvantage our current residents. So I appreciate the work that was done by previous councils and making the decision to try and make St. Catharines a more attractive place for that development, but I think the time has come, and so I strongly encourage all of my colleagues, and it sounds to me like most of us recognize that need, strongly encourage everybody to vote in favor this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Cisco. Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to add to what my colleagues have said. I sat on the task force and I attended every single meeting, and staff worked very hard on this, and so did the consultant. It was a very thorough process. I support the concept. I think it's something that is needed, and particularly when we're growing and we're the only municipality, not only in the region, but in the Golden Horseshoe, as Ms. Kitte said, that does not have this. I had one concern, which I have since been allayed. I think Councilor Kocha brought up something similar. The first recommendation did not include that transitional provision. So at the last meeting of the task force, I asked for a report on how much revenue would be foregone compared to the initial forecast. And it is a very large amount, potentially of close to $4 million, which is about close to 20%, 18% of what the total initial forecast was of revenue. However, I have discussed this with staff in detail, and I have discussed it with Councilor Littleton, and I'm persuaded that A, that it's fair to developers and people who have applied before, and B, that it's something that staff intended to do in the first place, but had not done it at the time of the first recommendation. So I will be supporting the recommendation before us. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, I just want to make a couple points. I think Councillor Cisco is correct. I was on the Chamber of Commerce back in 2009. Councillor Kushner, Councillor Dodge, Councillor Phillips, I think you were Councillor Williamson around the table. That was a tough decision, but for the public to remember, there was nothing going on in Niagara and St. Catharines. Nothing. Like, there was no development. Downtown was a waste town. There wasn't a lot going on downtown. There was no new buildings being built in St. Catharines, and so this was used as a competitive tool. So even though the slide up there talked about the aquatic center, to actually get to that number would have been impossible. Like, even to have DCs back in 2009, there was no development taking place, so there would have been no funds to draw from because of how limited the development was. So council at the time made a very good decision to try and create a bit of a competitive edge. And we'll qualify by this. And I know some residents, weren't happy with the development over on Glen Morris. That's I believe, a $150 million investment made by Homestead. And when talking to the CAO, our competitive advantage at the time over They're a national company that builds across the country. It was the fact that they were saving on development charges. So that's 400 rental units that are being brought onto the market because one of the reasons was no development charges. So you can argue growth pays for growth, and I agree with that. But for the decision that council made previously, you got 400 new rental units being built in a much needed market. I would say that that's a positive benefit when you talk about competitive advantages. So we're heading into development charges, and I think they've been done in a fair and equitable way. And I just wanted to thank the Vice Chair, Chuck McShane, who could be very vocal against a lot of decisions of council. And the fact that he's not here delegating tonight speaks volumes about their work that they did collaboratively with the home builders, the other organizations that are business driven. So it does show that the City of St. Catharines as a council is also listening to those concerns as well. So I just want to say thank you to staff, to the task force, and to the committee members who participated. This is going to be very important moving forward because I do think the development boom that we're about to experience is also going to create the opportunities for other public realm things to be built, and we're going to need additional dollars for that. So turn it over to the clerk for the vote, and we can move on with this.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Littleton.
Yes.
Councillor Harris.
Yes.
Councillor Kushner.
Yes.
Councillor Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Dodge.
Yes.
Councillor Miller.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Porter.
Yes.
Councillor Cisco.
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento.
Hardy, yes.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
And Mayor Sendzik.
Yes.
Carried unanimously.
Okay, 9.2, and this is based on a memorandum, correspondence sum item 4, and this was from our CAO in collaboration with the manager of St. Catharines Transit. And so this is a deferral from last meeting, and this is a motion to receive and file the memorandum from the CAO, and looking to put the motion on the floor just to receive. Councillor Sorrento, seconded by Councillor Porter. Okay, for questions, Councillor Dodge, you have a question?
I do have questions. Do I speak to what I want to ask the CAO right now?
Yeah, the motion's on the floor to receive.
Okay. So I didn't realize that we were just receiving this. I would like to, refer to what the CAO has put into his memo. This is the first I've seen this kind of thing. But anyway, I have 3 concerns that I'd like to have addressed and possibly put, I guess, in a motion to refer to what the CAO has put in there. 1 is on the governance. 2 is the organization that the organization of this be a true commission, and that the 7-year service guarantee, not a department, and a 7-year guarantee, have that brought forward to the region.
Okay, so because I think that's included in the actual report that's going to the region, so go to the CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, essentially the memo that was presented, all of that input has been forwarded through to the region.
Okay.
As part of the sort of that phase 2 second step of providing additional information. So the intent of this memo that was before council was really to put a bit more information. So it was actually co-authored between myself and Graham Morrison from the Transit Commission, just to put a bit more meat to some of the recommendations that were put forward. But yes, this has all been incorporated and included in the correspondence to the region.
Okay, so, but in your memo, what you put in here is that for the 7-year one, I don't know whether you necessarily agree with that. It says the guarantee for 7 years does not seem to be necessary. Is that your recommendation to the region, or is that, because that wasn't what came from transit?
Through Mr. Mayor, the intent of the 7-year piece, that was provided up to the region.
Okay.
I guess the point that we're trying to make in the memo, that's not necessarily a Transit Commission decision. That's a decision that this council would entertain through the service hours that essentially are establishing the services throughout. So the notion of whether it's a 5-year, 7-year baseline, that's embedded basically in the objective of the program. So the idea and the objective of the regional transit is to actually use that as a baseline and then grow service hours throughout. But the notion whether 5-year versus 7-year is something that council would actually provide input into.
Okay. Do we have an idea of when this council will be making that type of a decision? Is it before we vote on this? Like, when would that come into play?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, essentially what's happening right now, so there's a three-phase approach that's been taken through the Linking Niagara Transit. The first phase was the original report that was provided to council back, I believe, in March of this year, which provided the first iteration of what the model would look like. And that then, the comments that came back significantly changed the recommendations that came out of the report. So the original recommendation was based on per capita household income, assessment value per municipality. So the larger municipalities would have ended up having to put more money into the system. It was since changed to be based on service hours. So it was actually based on service provision within each municipality and each transit provider. The governance issue had been addressed. As you know, the first report recommended sort of the hybrid scenario with the commission. The second iteration, which might deviate a bit from where the Transit Commission is hoping to go, is trying to be more representative of all the municipalities. Those pieces and some of the issues that were brought forward by the Transit Commission are being fed into the process. So essentially what happens at this point now, I believe it's next week, is when the public consultation process starts, which means there's a website which is movingtransitforward.ca will be established to allow the public to see what the model looks like. There's going to be a social media campaign. Every municipal communications division are putting out all of that information. There's going to be social media and media on the buses themselves to get more and solicit more information from riders specifically. And then throughout that process, there's public engagements, online surveys, and different things that are going to be used to get additional input from citizens abroad as well as councillors and council. That then leads up to essentially the regional meeting in October, which would trigger the bylaw for the triple majority. And at that point, then each municipality would have a formal public meeting with public engagement to discuss all of the associated issues. And that's the point in time where all of these issues in the model get dealt with. But really it's essentially from now until mid-October, the end of October, that all of that public engagement will be happening.
Okay. So specifically when we talk about the governance and how large they're talking about the commission being, or whatever model they choose, of it being like larger than the TCC, even actually larger than what our city council is that somewhere in there? Like, it's not really mentioned in your memo, but is that being addressed by the fact that it's so large somewhere else?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah. So what's happening is all of this input and the memo is being incorporated into a report that the region will be bringing forward to the Linking Niagara Transit, and governance and all of these issues, because some of these issues came up in some of the other municipal discussions as well. So that's going to come forward to the Linking Niagara Transit to have discussion, and then subsequent recommendations will come back to this council.
Okay, so those three things are being addressed. And then through you, Mr. Mayor, sorry that I haven't gone through you, but I'm just wondering, so you've kind of talked about the public input and how the public's going to be informed and whatnot. Does that mean that we as St. Catharines, not as the region doing the open houses or whatever, are we as a city doing something to reach out to our own taxpayers, our own ridership on this item?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, essentially all of the communication offices are doing, our Engage STC platform is going to be used to solicit St. Catharines input. The idea is that every municipality has their own mechanism in how they engage their own stakeholders. So we're using the Engage STC platform and some other mechanisms to try to get as much input. The more people we can get engaged in providing information from St. Catharines, the better. And that's really the intent of the next 6 weeks.
Okay, so I guess what about, like, you know, when we have our budget meetings and, you know, if we have a road closure or, you know, anything like that, we have an open house, are we going to do the same thing? This is a big issue for St. Catharines. Are we going to be having an open house or something like that to the public so that they can come out to this?
So I'll jump in here. When it comes to the final decision-making of council, the council can do a two-step process. They can do a one night of delegations. So maybe on this issue, there will be 15, 20 people. You'll have a lot of different agencies that are going to want to speak to this and talk about the impacts. And then the second night, we can have a decision-making. So that's what that'll be for the public input side.
So we're just going to do possibly just one open house to this matter? Is that what
In addition to all the engagement that's being collected, I think on social media, you're going to collect a lot of information from St. Catharines people. That'll be factored into the report that you'll see before we actually have the public meeting.
Okay. And one last question, just for my own clarification. At the end of the day, when all this information comes back and stuff like that, who decides for St. Catharines whether we want to go regional or not? Does this council decide that, or does the region decide that for us?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the triple majority process it basically establishes this council has to approve moving forward. So essentially, you have to have 2/3 majority of councils, which incorporate 2/3 of the population, and I'm missing the third piece. But yes, it has to come to every single council, and if you don't hit one of those three components, then the bylaw essentially is killed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dodge. Councillor Williamson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My concern is in regard to governance. As it stands, we have full autonomy and decision-making control over the decisions we have on routes and coverage and how much we spend on our local public transit system. With this governance model, my concern is that the St. Catharines voice is going to get lost in the decision-making. We will you can make the argument that maybe we're being small-minded or parochial by not embracing regional transit, but we're here elected as St. Catharines officials, and if we turn the majority of the decision-making over to people from outside St. Catharines making decisions for us, my concern is that our voice isn't going to be heard. So that's, I think the big issue is here that we have some accountability by representatives that are locally elected or appointed locally at least, and that our voice doesn't get lost in this large proposed governance model that you're looking at. 15 for the transitional and then 20 for the final one. So that's my concern. Thank you.
That's a valid point, Councillor. And I think what I could do is I can connect you with Sean Collier, who's the mayor of Ajax. He's pretty much sitting in your shoes. Back in 2003, he ran on a platform against regional transit up in that area. And once he got in and found out, looked at the system, he's now chair of the commission. So it's important because he's followed it along. When I talked to him, I said, so, would you go back? And his answer was no, but it would be informed to have a councillor who maybe doesn't see the benefits. And he said without that kind of transit system today, Ajax would not have the connectivity into other communities that they have currently. And I asked him, I said, if councillors were interested in reaching out, would you take their call? And he said, absolutely. Like, I'd like to just create some, because he was very hesitant as well. That's all I'm saying when it happens. So that may be someone that you can talk to as well. Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure that this is the time to ask this question, but Mr. Oakes, you can tell me after I ask it. In regards to the People Mover in Niagara Falls, it's owned by, my understanding is, the Niagara Parks Commission. Is it operated by Niagara Falls Transit?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's essentially two separate operations. So that WeGo portion that you're referencing is not tied into this program. So Niagara Region Transit, which provides all of the Niagara Falls transit, is what's being discussed. The WeGo portion is separate.
The People Mover system, the big trunculated buses that you see driving around, is that operated by Niagara Falls Transit, or does the transit system, or does the park system have their own transit system? I'm not sure what you mean.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe it's a partnership between the Niagara Parks and Niagara Falls Transit as a function of the infrastructure that Niagara Falls Transit has, but they're essentially separating them out.
Okay, so my next question is, given that, if this regional transit system comes about as it is, will the operation of the People Mover be transferred from Niagara Falls to the Niagara Regional Transit System?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no. At this point in time, no.
Why is that?
That's the function of the relationship they have with WeGo operator in the system. It's just dealing with the 3 municipal, or the 4 when you factor in the regional transit. The WeGo isn't part of that at this point.
Okay. Personally, I have concerns with that because it's probably a moneymaker, and obviously this transit system is going to need all the cash they can. So I think that's something we should try to look into. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Miller, and then Councillor Garcia, because Councillor Miller was up first.
Yeah, just a question with regards to the public input. I think the difference between having just public come to council and delegate and an open house is the sort of back and forth with staff. So is there like a point person for public questions in terms of these, whatever the report's going to come out about what a single system would look like?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, there will. So once the actual communication comes out and the website is gone live, there'll be a single. The intent is to bring any specific questions to a single point person or group to be able to answer the questions.
Okay, great. And I guess remind council that it's sort of incumbent on us to drive people to that point so they can ask questions before we end up voting on it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the CAO, first of all, regarding communication, will we be issuing media release of some kind so that hopefully the newspapers will cover it, because not everybody's on the internet?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, there's been a team of, as I mentioned, the regional communications and all of the local municipal communication offices have been working collaboratively for the last 6 weeks, let's say, putting together the whole plan. So there's a website, there's an entire social media strategy, there's a variety of media releases that will go out the whole point is to solicit as much public engagement as possible. And every municipality, we all know how to connect with our stakeholders. So the intention is to use our own sort of mechanisms for getting to the public, but also, when you have 13 municipalities, including the region, putting out the same messaging, it should be probably one of the biggest and largest engagement opportunities that we've seen.
Thank you for that. And through you again to the CAO, Mr. Mayor, just read this past week that Welland Council passed a motion to defer joining intermunicipal transit until 2023, I believe. Number one, does that impact the decision that regional council is going to make? And if we do proceed with a triple majority process, can we in fact, through the triple majority, force one of the 3 municipalities that are providing the transit stock and assets to participate?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the discussion that Welland City Council had on the deferral was based on the information that they had, and part of the process, there were a few issues that I understand. So there's a CAO working group, and we had a meeting last week after all of essentially it was scheduled after all the municipalities had their discussions, and some of the discussion at the Welland Council was making some assumptions that have since been, I believe, clarified, which are going to be addressed in the Linking Niagara Transit report, which is including all of this information. So the idea is that once some of that information gets clarified, the notion of the deferral may not be a 2023, but it's providing more information to Welland City Council as well. So essentially, the way the process works is assuming that regional council passes the bylaw to initiate the triple majority process, then all of the councils would receive their reports and deal with it at the appropriate time. So all of the issues that Welland Council had addressed will be incorporated into their report that will be considered by Welland City Council. So it's a little premature to see what that's going to look like, but essentially the triple majority process defines how the process works.
So essentially, through you, Mr. Mayor, you're saying that the triple majority process would continue even if Welland does stick by what they said so far and say they want to defer to 2023?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So we have a motion to receive. Motion to receive. So you've already spoke, Councillor. So if you have anything really germane to the receiving of this.
Yes, it was something that the CAO, it's just for information. We had spoken about it earlier today, and that was when we would get the information back from the next Linking Niagara meeting, and he was going to get back to me. So I just wondered if, just for time frame on that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So essentially, the question that we had this afternoon was once the report comes from the Linking Niagara Transit, ensuring that it gets to the local councils before the regional council can deal with it. So that I've had that conversation, and that's in fact what will be happening. So we'll make sure that we'll get the report to this council ahead of time.
Thank you, Councillor Dodge. Okay, seeing no other further questions, it's only a motion to receive, so we don't have to do a recorded vote on this one unless someone wants a recorded vote. Does anyone want a recorded vote on a receiving of a file? Okay, all in favor of the receiving of the information? Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much for that discussion. We go to 9.3, which is another memo, and that was circulated and it was deferred from the last meeting. So again, I'll look for a motion just to receive the memo. Councillor Williamson, seconded by Councillor Sorrento. And just any questions on the memo? Okay, motion to vote on receiving of this.
One question, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Director Christie, I wasn't sure from his memo when he talks about a 45-day due diligence window, when that kicked in, and therefore when does the 45-day process end?
Okay, do we have any insight, since it's not our property and we're not involved in the transaction of the sale? Do we have an estimate of the timeline?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the information that we received from the YMCA is that this process will take them into the fall. Unfortunately, that's all we've been told, so we don't have definitive dates tied to that statement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garcia. Okay, a motion to receive this. Again, it's just a receipt, so all in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Okay, 10.1. So Councillor Townsend, you're up. Roll and Moote Street.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, it is really nice to be back with our colleagues in this chamber, and it's good, nice to see some smiling faces. The motion I'm bringing forward is to have staff be directed to investigate and report back to council on a parking strategy for Moote Street and Rolls Avenue neighborhood. As Councillor Sorrento and I have received many emails, phone calls about parking on the street, we are simply asking staff to look at a potential plan, to investigate it, come back to council with some of those options to put them on the table. I'm asking too if they could have it by Q4 of 2021, if that would give them enough time to bring something back.
Okay, I'll look over to Director Martuccio.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, that gives us enough time to take a look at the parking situation and report back to council.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, and I'll put that on the table.
Seconded by Councillor Sorrento. Questions? Not seeing any? Oh, sorry, Councillor Littleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering, I mean, we have parking issues throughout the city that I'm sure my colleagues here, I hear about parking issues all the time. I'm just wondering if this really needs to come back to council, or if this could just be dealt with between the ward councillors and staff. I don't know that we need to have a discussion about this since it's such a localized issue.
I don't know where I go with that since it's a councillor's question. I'll go to the CAO in terms of staff.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, typically these types of issues would have been delegated to staff in the past, but when it comes, if there's some direction that it just be dealt with at a ward level, we can certainly look into that. Director Martuccio, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
No, you've covered it all.
Okay, Councillor Townsend, in terms of could it be a two-step process if the investigation does come back with significant changes on parking, that it come back to council for consideration? But if it's not significant and changes can be made without council approval, can the ward councillors be the ones that champion that?
Yeah, I'm completely okay with that. To the point, the reason this is being put on the table is because of the last meeting we had with the residents. So that's why it was brought forward after receiving many phone calls, and was a council decision, last council, to deal with the development that was taking place on the street. But if it was Councillor Sorrento, I can surely, if we can work with staff on this, we would be greatly appreciative of that as well.
Okay, my only question on this would be to staff, if it's a report back to ward councillors, would that information be able to be shared with the residents when it's provided? Because with council, it's a public meeting, so.
Through Mr. Mayor, what I would suggest is the information going back to the ward councillors would go to all of council through correspondence, and then that could be provided to all.
That works.
That works.
Okay. All right, so it's a report back to ward councillors, and then a report coming back to council only if ward councillors bring it out of the memorandum. So I think we're good on that step. It's a two-step process. Okay, this is essentially a report request, so I'm just looking for a show of hands on this one. All in favor? Okay, opposed? That's carried. Okay, we now move on to 10.2. This is Councillor Cisco, and then also I believe Councillor Townsend wants to have some comments on this as well. Councillor Cisco, I think maybe you can speak on behalf of council here with some of the issues that we're seeing at hospitals with protests. So if you want to integrate some of those comments into your comments, I think we would all agree with the feelings that we're seeing across this country when it comes to protesting in front of hospitals.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and you sort of took the words right out of my mouth. This has obviously come to a head over the last couple of days, and we've been seeing over the last several months, lots of reports of nurses and other frontline medical staff leaving their jobs and getting out of the industry because of the stress and the work and the workload associated over the last 18 months due to the pandemic. The protests over the last couple of weeks have made it worse, and you're seeing more and more media reports of nurses choosing to step away from the field to find other employment. And this has a very specific impact. This was raised to me through social media about a week and a half ago by a local resident whose child requires a nurse in school to be able to attend school in person. But because of the nursing shortages being seen across the province, her child is not able to have that medical care, and it's leading to an inability to actually be in the classroom. And so the purpose of the motion is one of advocacy. I made it clear that this council obviously has no power to change things, but we can advocate on behalf of her and the families that are like her that require this direct medical care in schools and in the classroom, as well as calling on the province to allow the rules to open up in the short term for other qualified caregivers to be able to be there to help these students, whatever their medical necessities are. There are a variety of different students, and I can speak from experience as a parent of a child with special needs. There are a variety of different needs that our children face on a day-to-day basis when they want to enter the classroom. We all know, and society has very clearly learned over the last 18 months, that the best form of education is an in-person, face-to-face education. But there are a number of young people in our community and across Niagara and the province of Ontario who are essentially being denied that opportunity because of this nursing shortage in the province. So the motion asks that we call upon the Government of Ontario to immediately identify and implement solutions to this crisis that would allow the resumption of in-person learning for these kids, possibly including but not limited to greater incentives to retain qualified nurses and the allowance of trained caregivers to fill these roles. And as you said, Mr. Mayor, and as I've mentioned, the protests that we've seen today and in the last couple of days have made this situation worse, not better. And I think this is my opportunity to call on those people in our community who think an appropriate use of their time is to protest in front of hospitals and to disrupt the ability of people to access timely medical care, that they're making a mistake and that they are hurting and damaging the people in their community that they keep trying to say that they're defending and trying to stand up for. This motion deals with the repercussions of their actions. That's not to say that this council shouldn't have some more comment at a later date about their actions themselves, but I hope council will support this motion. As I said, it deals with the consequences of the last 18 months and the damage that we've done to the nursing profession in particular, but the healthcare profession in general across the province of Ontario. And so, again, I would hope that my colleagues will support this and we can advocate for those members of our community who deserve face-to-face education.
Thank you, Councillor Cisco. Well said, and seconded by Councillor Porter. Councillor Townsend, you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to my colleague for bringing this forward. And I echo the same comments made. No one deserves to have slurs, profanity, or any type of harassment towards them, especially if they're a healthcare worker, doctor, nurse. Hearing some of the stories from some of the healthcare workers, it's just disheartening. It's unwarranted and it's unnecessary. So we call on our community to come together to continue to support our healthcare workers. And again, thank you to Councillor Cisco for bringing this forward. I'm in full support of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Okay, so I think Councillor Cisco speaks on behalf of all of council on the comments that he's made. Councillor Garcia.
Mr. Mayor, what I believe is just a friendly amendment. I certainly fully support this. I suggest that we should also forward it to MPP Gates and also to the all the local area municipalities in Niagara region.
That's definitely friendly. MPP Gates wasn't included because he was the only one of the four who isn't specifically a St. Catharines MPP, but I agree wholeheartedly that he should be added in as one of our Niagara representatives.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, recorded vote on this one. And I know it's going to be unanimous, but just recorded vote for the, let's just do it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Porter.
Yes.
Councillor Cisco.
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento.
Yes.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
Councillor Dodge.
Yes.
Councillor Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Harris.
Yes.
Councillor Kushner.
Yes.
Councillor Littleton.
Yes.
Councillor Miller.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
And Mayor Sensick.
Yes.
Carried unanimously.
Okay, there's no calls for notice of motions. Just make sure they get into, there is a call for notice of motion.
Yes.
Councillor Dodge.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to call for a notice of motion on mental health and addiction for St. Catharines.
Okay, and is there a subject matter on it in terms of more depth? Because there's, if you do, I think you should contact both my office, the work that we're doing, also the CAO's office, the work that NASO's doing. So instead of maybe bringing forward a motion that is in duplicate, depending on what the subject matter is, there's a lot of work being done in that file.
That's great, and I would love to speak to people on that, and I will do my due diligence in the weeks to come before I bring this, but I just wanted to put it on the floor.
Okay, thank you.
But I definitely plan to do that.
Okay, that's great. Any other notices? Okay, seeing none. Report requests, there are no report requests. And committees and task force minutes. Can I have a motion? Councillor Garcia, do you want to make the motion on receiving the minutes of the advisory committees of council, seconded by Councillor Kushner? Any questions on the minutes? All in favor? Those are carried. Closed session, we have none. Motion arising, there is none. And bylaws, that the bylaws listed in council agenda A through G be read for a first time, considered and passed. They be signed and executed by the mayor, city clerk. Councillor Sorrento, seconded by Councillor Miller. I want to get the social side, the Zoom side on there. All in favor of the bylaws? Do you want the clerk? We okay? Okay, we're carried. Thank you very much on that. We only had a couple bylaws on there anyway. And then the motion to adjourn. This could be a record. This is a pre-COVID, post-COVID record for sure.
So obviously being in person is a lot quicker.
There you go. Okay, I'm gonna hold you at Councillor Garcia. Motion to adjourn, Councillor Townsend, seconded by Councillor Kushner. All in favor? Thank you very much. A great meeting. A lot has been covered. Look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time, I believe. All right. Get out and vote. All the folks who haven't voted, get out and vote. Take care.